Hi, everybody, and thank you. Today's the second day. My name is Hayvi Bouzo, and I wanted to start to mention, about me as a journalist. I truly believe in the power and the importance and the responsibility of media. And because of that, we're going to be talking today about the narrative, the media narrative in Egypt, which has been accused, and increasingly so, by promoting hate speech, basically anti-Western narrative, and in some cases celebrating terrorism. These are very big claims, and we're going to be discussing these very important issues today with our guest speakers. And the questions we're going to be asking are, first, are these claims accurate? Basically, we want to talk about those specific examples of, many things that were actually also mentioned yesterday about, for example, if there were an attack against a church, how that's being broadcasted or covered as an accident. If there is a fire at a church, and there's so many other examples. But also, we want to talk about who is responsible for this narrative and media coverage in Egypt. And Egypt is considered to be one of America's closest allies in the Middle East, North Africa region. So it's a very important topic. And to answer these questions, we're going to be talking to our panelists today, who will give us basically 10 minutes each. We're going to have remarks from them, and then we're going to start the discussion right after. We'll start with Mohamed Gohar, founder of 25 TV, who hit 17 Copts in his office building during the Maspero Massacre. He graduated in cinema studies from Cairo University. He was chosen by President Sadat to become his cameraman, closely covering the peace process between Israel and Egypt. He also worked as with NBC News in New York, and he helped launching 4 independent TV stations around the Arab world. In 2011, he launched 25 TV to give voice to the young people and generations. Let's welcome Mohamed Gohar.
Honored to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to correct only one sentence of the presentation. You say I hide the Copts in my office. We all know about Maspero. I'm not going to go on details of how this happened, but they call it the massacre of Maspero. But I like to mention that I actually didn't hide. How can I hide 16 people in one room with vicious military dressed people with machine guns, breaking all the doors and going through every box in the office for continuously 18 hours? And there is 52 young men and women, Muslim and Christians. No single one of them raised his fingertip to point where the hidden Copt was. So it wasn't me. It wasn't the 52 people. It was Rabbina. It was their God who saved them. And I like to say what I didn't say before. I don't like to go in details on Maspero. First, because there is a video, I send it to Solidarity for anybody who would like to watch. It was my last film. I did millions of films. It was my last one when I first went to Canada, and I did it with Canadian TV, including the picture of the army vehicles who were hitting the peaceful demonstration in Maspero, including these shots. But the second main reason I don't want to talk about Maspero, because unfortunately I was asked by the head of the Coptic church not to mention Maspero. Personally, face to face, I was asked not to mention Maspero. And when I asked why, he said we want to lay out bad action happen under a political system into a new system coming, which was Sisi when he started. But I like to go further a few days after. After the Maspero, it took me 8 days to restore put back the office together, and we retransmit 25 TV, which I launched from Tahrir Square for the young people, average age of 21 years old, producers, presenters, singers, dancers. They were all 25, and I picked them all from the social media which happened during the Egyptian Revolution. And it was one of the most popular TV station ever happened, with really the first and the last news bulletin which carry the truth and never twist facts in the life of television in the Middle East. But 10 days after Maspero, I was standing in my office talking on the phone, and I found these two men, again in military clothes, coming close to me, and they were pushing me to the edge, trying to throw me out of the balcony to my desk. And I kept talking on the phone, hoping to remove them back to the human side of not doing that, but they kept pushing me until I became like this much of the balcony. And when I found that the phone talking trick is not working out, and they insisting to do what they do, and I hear them saying, "Traitor, why are you doing this?" He said, "You're a traitor." Whom I trade? So at the end, when we came very close to the balcony, I put my arm around their neck, and I looked them in the eye and said, which one of you is going to come down with me? And then the rest of the office workers came and saved me from their hands in the last minute. The security forces did not succeed in their mission because, as you can see, I'm here with you now. But they definitely succeeded in throwing down Egypt's secular coexistence, especially after they start killing my own reporters and aiming to all the press which was giving a good image about the revolution. They aim young people, killed. They aim one cameraman, they shot him by a sniper in the head. And they succeed in intimidating anyone who dare to help the Copts again. False information spread by fundamentalists has incited terrorist attacks against Copts. The attack against Copts has been fueled by false information spread by fundamentalists. In addition, constructions in Egypt against press freedom and freedom of expression has left zero space for the Copts to express themselves. Violence and terrorist attacks against Copts became systematic and even normal. All media outlets under government control. There was a question raised earlier here in this room, how many Coptic victims died in the last decade. But I have another question. How many Christians exist in Egypt? Nobody knows. Can anybody tell me? The official the official, according to the latest statistics given by the church, and we all know how much the church is embedded with the government now, that they are 14%. This is based on research and cathedral church when they go for baptism. 14%. That makes them 1.6 million population in Egypt. 106 million Copts in Egypt. It's bigger than any other Arab country population. That's exactly 14,800,000. 14,800,000. The official government numbers for them estimate they are only 5%. For government, the smaller the minority, the more rights are given to the majority. And of course, no press is allowed to investigate or research a number or report on the real numbers of how many Copts in Egypt. Almost every day, there is a new attack that Egyptian media cannot cover. Last March 29 of this year, another church in Asyut, another Coptic church, was consumed in fire. My question, did anybody see a report in any of the media outlet, including the social media, about it? Did you ever see even a picture of that? When my company was there, Video Cairo, and along the decades, there is no one single attack against Copts we missed. And there is no one single picture we didn't transmit in the whole world. So the whole world can at least recognize that there is a problem here has to be tackled. The official report, as usual, was that the fire caused in Minya by gas leak. But considering that 1,000 Coptic church was set on fire in the last decades, we want to see real and independent investigation of what happened in Asyut. We will never give up on putting this call. We want even the press to go and show us picture. This is the least rights we should know. Real investigation about what happened. But in the same time, if we think that even Maspero we didn't get investigation about, there was 2 times where investigation pretended to be happened, but we never see results. Until today, we don't know why the 28, that's an official number, of murderers who died under the army tracks, why they died. We don't have an official investigation about this. The Salafis has regained the control and influence over media outlets. They present a false legitimacy based on conservative principles that does not protect Copts or give them voice. Copts are trying not to lose their pride, their belief, and their culture. And they're almost giving up on system that protects them. Egypt needs unbiased media that listen to Copts, respect their rights, and stand with them against the hostile actions. Copts in Egypt need to be respected. And represented fairly in government, institutions, civil groups, associations, politics, unions, private sectors, and legal systems. A few weeks ago, an Egyptian soldier crossed the border between Israel and Egypt and killed a number of Israeli soldiers. Almost all media in Egypt, unfortunately, including social media, which I consider more the people's media, celebrate him and his acts as a shaheed, a hero martyr, not as an outlaw, reporting as if killing Israelis was the only way to restore the lives of the Palestinians. Some would ask, what does this has to do with the oppression of the Copts? Listen, ladies and gentlemen, racism is a disease. Once it's infected the person or the community, it destroys the ability to think independently, to sympathize with others, or to build a meaningful relationship. Instead, people are powered to hate and kill. The extremist media against Copts' right is the same media that celebrate the killing of a Jew. There is no defender of peace and no support for the rights of all people to live in safety. Persecution of the Copts make it easier to kill a Jew. So the peace in the Middle East starts by respecting the Copts. Whoever understands the rights of a single Copt from southern city in Egypt has not only underestimated the rights of Israelis to live in security, but the human rights of all. Thank you very much. How do we get there? First of all, I thank Mark because he explained in a very useful and charming way of how the social media can do it. Take up the fight on local media, but do it on social media, but do it responsibly. We are all in social media now. And social media can be a dangerous and difficult place to be. So don't declare war against the bad people or those who want to hurt you. Ignore them. Your movement has to promote peace and be proud of it. The very climate we need in the Middle East the very climate, this is the very climate we need. And don't give up. Don't give up. This will be a long struggle. Don't be afraid to tell anyone who will listen about the Coptic Christian story, a story of peace and love. Make the case for the culture identity of the Copts, its civilization and history. Give a voice to the many Copts who are considered icons in science, in social service, economics, and all aspects of Egyptian life. Like, for instance, Dr. Magdi Yaqub, and many, many, many others. The real sword and the root of Egypt. Focus your effort on lobbying international organizations, especially NGO. We almost all of us giving up on governments. Or UN organizations. Create a movement with ideas of peace and respect so that different people can live together. Tell your stories and create new hashtags. Form groups and make noise. Don't let solidarity work alone. Get your families and your kids to keep this in mind, that we all have to live together, and living together start by respecting the indigenous. Get influenced people to be influenced and make sure the world can hear you. Support and encourage journalists and media that want to tell you stories. But no, this will only happen if you stand up and stay standing up. You are part of history. Take your place in the story that must now be written. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohamed Jarrar, for this profound these profound remarks. Now with our second panelist for today, Bashar Jarrar is a seasoned political analyst and media consultant with over 35 years of experience. He possesses a wealth of knowledge and experience in international broadcast journalism. He is also an executive news producer and editor covering primary events, regular news, and political shows. Bashar has a master's degree in peace studies from the University of Bradford in the UK. Welcome to the stage.
To start with, say Assalamu alaikum, peace be with us, in us, and from here, from this concept, I would like to start. Peace starts within. If I lack my internal personal peace, I will not be able to vibrate, to communicate, to channel that peace to others. I've been raised in a Franciscan school in Amman, Jordan, Teresanta College. And one of the hymns that I believe it's revered all over the world, make me the channel of your peace. So here is the beginning and the end of everything. Coming from a very well-diverse community, I said to Hayvi, I call you cousin, because 75% of my genetics are Kurdish. So I know what it means to be an Arab and a Kurd, what it means to be a Jordanian and American, what does it mean to be coming from a Muslim family who decided solidly to be raised as secular family and leave faith to our journey in life, how it was really hard to take a decision to be unique as a Muslim family where all your cousins are in Muslim schools, some of them in like semi-kutab kind of schools, and you are in a Catholic school. And my life journey took me to choose, and here we say about choice. Everything in life is choice. Till you begin your journey as a believer, there are choices, definitely, because God loves us and respects us and value our freedoms. But there is also Dabat al-Kull. There is a God that controls with love everything. And for that reason starts my personal love to Egypt and to Copts. I love two words, two things from the Coptic culture. One of them, thank you, you raised that, عظم زرقاء. That blue bone. I know that because the only exception as a Jordanian to allow non-married Copts or Egypts or any nationality to live in a family residential was Copts from Egypt. Because they are known to be respectful, family-oriented, and at that time I was exploring life as a teenager. I was really fond by kind of socialists coming from Syria, that kind of bombardment of media, the socialist culture. And that Copt, that I don't remember his name, he was a teacher. They came to Jordan out of persecution, one of the episodes of persecution of Copts in Egypt. That was in early days of late Mubarak. Rahmatullah alayh, peace be with all alive and dead. To those who believe in Jesus Christ, they will be resurrected, and everyone according to his faith. But what I know, here is not narrative, and this is what I'm trying to communicate in this kind of unwritten script. The narrative, the true narrative, were the parables of Jesus Christ, where he was leading by example. When you show what is love, when you show what is service, when you show what is love thy neighbor. From that, I encountered the first Egyptian Copt in my life. They were both teachers, and he was a calculus teacher. I hate calculus. I hate it, not love it, I hate it. At 10 number, I struggle with numbers. But he gave me a book. I don't remember the name of the author, but he was so kind that he gave me a book for a Muslim author. And it was called, I believe, Allah, God. It caught my attention. What kind of a person is that? I don't know him, but I know this is a Christ-like person. He is talking to a Muslim. He doesn't want to give him something for Father Shnuda, Allah yarhamu. He want to give him something related to his culture. It caught my attention. Maybe it was one of the stepping stones that I moved from being like socialist, secular, leaning towards left, to the first steps on, let's say, who's God? Let's study this. And the second part of the Egyptian component, Coptic component that I love and adore is when they swear, and it's known, you shouldn't say the name of God, but they say, Wil Masih al-Hayy, meaning, I swear I hold the living Christ. If you believe as a Christian, as a Muslim, as a Jew, like the walls of Jericho fell down because there were believers doing something, not with a sword necessarily, could be only a hallelujah. And then these barriers of hate and division could tumble down, will fall down. So my personal growth in faith and in profession And that takes me back. I love personal stories. I love them. I really do love them. Because I believe it's your parents and your God who wrote them. I go to the days where I was raised in Kuwait. And this is a testimony. I shared in social media when I received with really humble and honor your invitation, Majdi, brother Majdi, who I love and respect. That I never met him before, but the way he speaks through media says that he is courageous and he's honest. And we disagree on many things, as you know, brother Majdi. But what I'm trying to say here, that your narrative in your life, you don't choose your religion, you don't choose where you live, you don't choose anything. Your parents will do that choice. And then it's God's journey. Because my parents chose in Kuwait, where Islah al-Ijtima'i, Muslim Brotherhood, are ruling. And there's a kind of a feedback to every brother who raised the issue of what kind of a cancerous devil is Muslim Brotherhood. So at that time, I'm talking about early 70s, like during the Cold War, we're like making deals here in DC and in London with political Islam and militant Islam so you can defeat communism. This is a fallacy. And we realized that after 9/11. What happened that they took a bulldozer to knock down the wall of the school, which is an Iraqi Kildani school, Rahibat al-Mansura. So the persecution of Iraqis, like Egyptians, like Kuwaitis who are Christians, like Sudanese, it all has its story. And you don't need to read it in a book or to tune into a radio channel to see if they are saying the truth or not. We live that, like living stones. We live that every day. So what they did, they knocked down, I remember that as a little kid, they knocked down the wall of because it has a cross, and they didn't allow the nuns to have any dress of being as a nun, including the cross. You put the cross inside. Now, here's another flashback. Flashback, what is now in America and many European Western worlds. Among the discussion earlier today, someone was saying, you know, Islamophobia, there's no claustrophobia. No, there is claustrophobia. See what nuns are suffering from now due to liberal agenda. It's the same ugly face. Be it who hates the truth under the banner of Islamic extremism or under the banner of liberalism. And as rightly one of the speakers said, that it seems to be inclusive, but under the table, it is segregation. So now, I'll fast forward. When I studied my PhD, oh, that's a good omen. When I studied my peace studies, master degrees, it was a gift from the British government. It was competitive. So I joined that as a Jordanian, British embassy, thanks to everyone involved. I had my master's degree in Britain, and there the Lord took me in the journey to know more and after and beyond Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I learned about Quakers. I learned about how the Methodism, all these kinds of things, and everything like opens your eyes for something. To take it a further step, what brought me here to America, believe it or not, one of the ramifications of 9/11. Because of that terror, and because of that great motto, winning the hearts and the minds, while Majdi was talking on Al Jazeera about why we are under attack and why, when Thomas Friedman said why they hate us, well, we know the answer. So the answer was, let's have a TV, not only a radio channel. Radio channel was Free Europe, Fighting Communism, and Al Hurra Project was the reason that brought me here with my family. And we almost became colleagues, and we know the other part of the story that I will not mention here, that's for both of us. But everything here, friends, ladies and gentlemen, everything here, brothers and sisters, is about the narrative. the narrative, if you want to have credibility to report, to be a witness, that there's a prosecution, then the martyrs who paid their lives, they had the courage, as the widow said, with a cheerful heart, like when you give to the church, you give with a cheerful heart, not tithing like, give me the $10 from your $100. But you continued what they did. When you do that kind of a movie, or documentary, or social media, mashallah alayka Mark, I was watching you, I wanted this to my kids, as one brother said there. We want this message to be narrated not by those who have only the money, because they are manipulators. 27 seconds of a caption on Fox News was taken for stating one incident. I will not go into politics. But for me, it is an ethical. I will be asked where I'm spending my dollars. So yes, I unplugged from a certain TV station. I stopped paying them like $120 a month, and I supported another one. Why? Because you are a part, and here was the title of my, I called it not a lecture, a testimony. I insist on that. This is my testimony. And I called it in Arabic, and I will translate in English, al-ittihadu ya'nik wa'atik, meaning prosecution, al-ittihad, it will get to you. Get it? It will get to you sooner or later. Because those who knocked down the wall in my school in the early 70s, and they were liberated by American blood, by Arab blood, by allied forces from more than 30 countries in the world, or approximately even 60 in the world, liberated. Why? Not to lose Kuwait now again. Kuwait now is falling in the trap of fundamentalism. So if you want to give the narration, we are all asked to give that narration, not only be the people. Every one of us has a story, and every one of us will be asked to have the testimony. The testimony of the martyrs was blood. Your testimony was video and production. And the first two questions came to my head: why George Soros will not fund you? I know why he will not even his son. But why Sawiris will not, Najib Sawiris, will not fund you? I will communicate this on Twitter later tonight. Why? Because this testimony is our responsibility, and if we want to be really accountable and truthful, the truth, we know the truth, and let me finish by this. According to Christian faith, be it Orthodox or Catholic or Protestant or Methodist, before the split or after the split, whatever you want, Mormon, Quakers, whatever, there was a promise by Jesus Christ himself. He said, do not be afraid, I will leave with you the Comforter. I will send the Comforter. Among the duties, the benefits, the gifts of the Holy Spirit is to be encouraged, not to be afraid to say at least the truth. At least say the truth. So despite of my political views that are contrary to some of the speakers today, but I cannot accept on my heart or my conscience, there is no persecution across the Muslim world and across the Arab world. It is not only Egypt, and it is not only the Copts who are persecuted. Kurds are persecuted as well. Kurds, let's say as cousins, Kurds, some of them are Christians. Many people from the Kurdish population now are coming to Christ. They are persecuted twice, like double persecution. Persecuted because they are not Arabs, and persecuted because they choose not to be Muslims, and they want to become Christians. They are persecuted double time. So it is our responsibility. Solidarity with Coptic, or Coptic solidarity, is basically a moral decision. regardless of my views, political views towards Egypt as a country or as a regime, the enemies of Egypt never changed. They are the same as in Iraq and in Syria, because the first violations of human rights in Iraq, believe it or not, I watched it through Israeli TV. At that time, there was no social media, there was no satellite. And I was shocked. As a person who was bombarded by media, I said, no way this could happen. And the persecuted were Shia. They were not Christians. But it is the same ugly face. The same ugly face that Christians in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Egypt, Sudan now, it is the same story. It is only about who controls the narrative, and it will never be the mic or the microphone. Now God gave us this kind of a tool, which is your cell phone. Your cell phone can be your witness and your testimony and your weapon. And thank you, everyone. God bless.
Thank you, Bashar, Jarrar, for this statement. And now we're gonna talk about to our third panelist for today. Sherif Mansour is an Egyptian American democracy and human rights activist. Before joining CPJ Committee to Protect Journalists, he worked with Freedom House in Washington, D.C., where he managed advocacy training for activists from the Middle East and North Africa. Let's welcome Sherif Mansour.
Thank you, Magdi, and everyone who organized today's gathering. Sorry I couldn't be there yesterday. I come here with two hats, a few more, but one of them is my day job at the Committee to Protect Journalists. It's a non-for-profit organization that focuses on defending journalists worldwide, and I head the Middle East team. But also as an Egyptian American and a democracy activist, I think having the First Amendment here makes it clear to me there is not really any difference when we talk about press freedom or religious freedom. You cannot have one without the other. And I think this is the central question that I'd like us to think about today. And I want us to start not just from Maspero in Egypt, in 2013 specifically. I had started my job at CPJ the year before, and I was working on a special report that was released exactly in September 2013 under the title On the Divide, Press Freedom at Risk in Egypt. And that report basically documented what happened in terms of religious fascism and later on political fascism that took over Egypt under the military-led government. We started with documented how the Muslim Brotherhood have, for the full year where former President Mohamed Morsi was in power, have tried to threaten critical liberal and secular voices, including religious freedom advocates and minorities. But also we raised the alarm about how the army is going exactly in the same direction. Since 10 years ago, Egypt has been one of the worst jailers of journalists. To our count, this last December, there were 21 journalists in jail. One of them, Ala Fattah, is in jail because of what happened in Maspero. He was there defending the rights of Copts to protests. And he and many others over the course of the last 10 years have been put in jail just for covering protests. Any protest, political, religious, syndicate, all of them calling for not just freedom to expression, freedom to organize, and religious freedom. All the three components of our First Amendments here. I want to just mention a few of our research numbers to show. For example, in 2013, 7 journalists were killed. covering protests, including 4 in one day, the deadliest day against the press in Egypt during the Rabaa massacre in July in 2013. This is 7 out of 13 that we at the committee have documented overall have been killed while doing their job since 1992. Egypt has been one of the Muslim countries imprisoning journalists, but using 2 main charges. I told you about the protest laws and how they continue to use it, but 2 very relevant laws to our discussion today, anti-terrorism laws. This military-led government have, since 10 years ago, used the card of defending religious minorities against terrorism to define terrorism as any protest or deviation from the government line. When we said on the divide 10 years ago, there is no divide now in Egypt. There is no multiple narratives. There is not even one narrative now in Egypt. You're not safe if you're working with the government or if you're working against the government. You're not safe if you're secular. You're not safe if you're religious. And this, I think, what I want to end with, censorship. It used to be that journalists in Egypt at least will be able to express themselves in exile. And as Copts, a lot of you have been forced out of Egypt over decades. You understand that we have a role to play here as Egyptian Americans, but also as advocates. And many of those exiled, like me, have had their stories driving their families out. And they, like me, have faced an added layer of censorship. Our families back home get imprisoned, get retaliated against, just because we're speaking up, just because we're doing human rights advocacy here in Washington, D.C. I want to end by saying this is not just about showing how bad at censorship the Egyptian government is. It's about the responsibilities of our other government, the U.S. government, who supplies this regime with weapon aid for decades with very little conditions. Over the last 2 years, under this Biden administration, we've seen more conditions added, including on releases of political prisoners and journalists, and including on retaliation against U.S. citizens through their families at home. Right now, we continue to demand that these conditions make its way to the final budget in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate with more money condition, not just 10% like the last 2 years, and more specific conditions about press freedom, religious freedom, and religious of association that can actually force this so-called dialogue ongoing in Egypt to do what they promised to deliver on. Release political prisoners, release human rights and democracy advocates, release journalists who are being held hostages for doing their job. I'm going to end here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sherif Mansour. Now I'm going to move the microphone to the panel, and you guys can also write your questions for the Q&A segment that we're going to... is there questions or no? Yes.
I don't think we have any more papers.
Oh, okay.
We just have a few. If you are going to ask a question, we just ask that you keep it brief so that other people have time to ask as well.
Yes, and I'm just going to start and we'll move the microphones. Whoever wants to respond, and I'll give you the ability to do that. There is a gap between what the Egyptian government says and what the media basically reports in Egypt. And there's a fundamental question here. It's like, what is the reality of the media in Egypt today, and how does this gap happen between what the announcements are and how we basically hear the same news coverage of different incidents that have happened throughout the years being covered in the media. Who would like to talk about this?
After the gentleman, both of them are more capable, I believe, in tackling this matter.
It's enough to know that all the independent media, myself and others who were trying to build in Egypt, was all destroyed in the last 10 years. It's enough that it's almost nationalized. All outlets of media are now controlled by government, and not 100% controlled by government, because they cannot even carry the government voice. They are supported by petrodollar or controlled and censored by petrodollar. So what the Egyptian government tried to do is to get the press to be used as once described the arm of the government, and instead of that, they became actually the arm of the petrodollar and the oppression, the twisting facts in the media leads to.
I think I mentioned a little bit how the anti-terrorism laws, for example, was used, but it was introducing new things that we haven't seen in Egyptian legislation, including high fines, unheard of, jail time, and even punishment of stopping a journalist from doing journalism, just for writing anything other than the official army statements about army anti-terrorism operation. That happened in 2015. That's when the number of censorship skyrocketed in Egypt. And in many ways, after the government have exerted its control already on the rest of the society. The other example I want to say is that, we've been through COVID. The government handling of COVID was put as a red line specifically by one of the new institutions, media regulators, that this government have created also from scratch, where they can specifically say 1, 2, 3, 4, these are something that there is a media blackout, you cannot discuss without the approval of the Attorney General, and that meant no discussion. So that was, for example, used when people were discussing the threat of Nile water coming down from Ethiopia. Just a government decision. No one is able to discuss this in the media. So handling of COVID, which is an existential threat, handling of terrorism, which is an existential threat, handling of water supply that people need, also became with just one, signature, impossible and out of discussion.
Yes, I want to add one more
Yes,
item.
you and Bashar.
We hear about a war going in Sinai for the last 10 years. Did you ever hear about one independent reporter or even governmental reporter covering this war? I never heard of that. I personally went to 14 wars. In 40 years I covered, starting in 1973, we still have in mind the picture of the big war where press were allowed to take picture. The only war in the history which no picture and no press are covering it.
Well, I will take it a different level based on the vantage point, I would say, not the perspective. I've been dealing with media, both foreign and Arabic based, both private sector and government sector. Before the war in terror and after the war in terror. Before Trump became a president and after he lost the elections. And I found out the following. First of all, the concept of embedded journalism that was something we were new about till the first Gulf War. So we had that kind of a perspective that was the Mohamed Gohar is hinting to, that embedded journalism will give you the chance to be reporting even from the field. But just the concept of embedded means that military people will do the clearance, and they are not different. From experience, I'm saying. All militaries on all over the world, they think from the same castle mind mentality. Now, the other thing I would like to mention, that media tools and industry is different. Now we have social media. So whatever you want to deny or manipulate as a narrative, or what's really going on in Sinai or on the water issue or any other Arab countries, you have alternative with social media. And that will bring me to the most important, I believe, problem. We have a disease and we are addressing the symptoms. When you see the level of hate speech on social media, that gives you a hint. The problem is with understanding the world and your vision to the world, how you view things. It is not only who controls this media. Is it the political party or the tycoon, media tycoon? And the petrodollar, you have petrodollar now paid to both parties. But people were against Sisi and people who were with Sisi. And both of them were, I know channels, they were funded from the same even country. Because someone who thought that he is doing a good service to the country or to the cause want to have the dialectic of narratives, like your view and my view. But you shouldn't tolerate hate speech as being a view that you need to counterpart. So the problem, answering your question in a sentence, we should make it owned by people. Unless we have media initiated and controlled by people, you will always suffer from that kind of manipulative narrative of what you have on air.
Mohamed, did you want to add something? Because I can follow up with that. Is because, for example, when you hear about the Egyptian government opening up a cathedral, while we're seeing that there was, repeated burning of churches, that is said that it's because of electricity issues. We see what happened, with Mohamed mentioned, with basically the Egyptian soldier attacking, crossing to the Israeli borders, killing 3 IDF soldiers. Those are all things that are just against the interest of Egypt, because not only that there is a peace agreement, that there's a lot of different deals that are benefiting Egypt economically, that this person is going against the orders that he should be receiving from his superiors. The same thing with the church, that there's all these repeated burning of churches in Egypt. Where is the responsibility should fall in terms of the coverage, and how somebody like this, like we saw, for example, in Egyptian media, that this person was celebrated, as Mohamed said, as a hero. We saw this also from Joe Sho, who is, known to be a Muslim Brotherhood, affiliate. But what about the government-controlled media? And this is where I think there's still I would like to hear more from your perspective on why is this happening?
We don't usually discuss content of media, but I can tell you that over the course of the 10 years, the government has been able to effectively shut down dozens of media outlets that was mushroomed after the January 25th revolution. We heard about January 25th channel. It was one of at least a dozen in one day that was stormed by police 10 years ago and by army officers and shut down forcibly. And since then, there was a period in which the government cared a little bit about how their action will be perceived, not just inside the country, but outside the country. And once there was no pretense about describing what they wanted to do, I think this is when all the gloves came out, and I can name at least 130 journalists that became imprisoned over the last 10 years. Many of them have been put into what we call like a revolving door policy. And this is what, it's not just about scaring people, it's just about making example of journalists so that no one else dares to question or to even ask questions. And that means that they will put something like police monitoring. Someone like Shawkan, he spent 5 years in jail. After those, until today, for years, he has to spend every night in a police station. We don't consider him free. We still consider him in jail. He just has like a brief time during the day in which he can be just a human. Can he do journalism if he has to go back to prison every day? I don't think so. Can he actually find a job that allows him to do this kind of? No. So the idea here is that one by one, those measures have been introduced, implemented in retaliation under the full control of the government and under the incitement to the highest level, including from the president himself, against media, against editors, and accusing them of being, quote unquote, the bad people.
Mohamed Oxygen is
Another, please.
Mohamed Oxygen and many, many others. Mohamed Oxygen has never been visited by his family for the last 9 years, just because he was doing independent video, reporting what's happening in the street. And many others. It's really shameful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that full-heartedly, but there is a need to discriminate or to dismantle the real problem. The real problem, which is a very good example that you brought in to the discussion. Look to the narrative and the comments coming on the incident on the borders. And what is the real difference in content between what social media, meaning people, when they are free to say whatever they want, or the controlled narrative? What I see as a journalist specialized in that, I would say I have a huge problem here. First, those who raise their voices, not necessarily the majority, because I didn't participate in that kind of discussion because it is not murky, it's dirty water. Because this is unacceptable. As an Egyptian nationalist who considers only Egypt's interests, I should say that is wrong. I have a soldier who didn't honor his duty and did a terror act, regardless of the semantics, what kind of narrative you put. On the other hand, there's a huge failure for the people who think that they are serving the regime, because it is a very, with all due respect, very unconvincing narrative, because they took the defensive kind of argument and they didn't tackle the main issue, which will lead to having this kind of hate speech repeated again and again and again, and not only politics. Even when you have people, this is one issue for Egyptian Copts, why we don't see in soccer teams any Copts? That's a big question. Well, you have it in swimmers. What were your comments then, social media? They were disgusting, some of those comments, which means it is not a media, it's not even political. It is the belief system. It is the culture that needs to be addressed seriously.
I like also to mention the obstacles put in front of the international media of coverage issues in Egypt. Until 2011, almost all media around the world was represented in Egypt, and any one of them can take a camera and go on the street and make a report. In in the 80s and the 90s, we had, this is before private and independent TV was allowed to work in Egypt. It was all governmental in all the Arab world, not only Egypt. But who led the fight against fundamentalism and terrorism when there was a bomb in every coffee shop and in every church almost daily in Egypt? Who led the fight against them? It was CNN. We have one reporter here who was the reporter of CNN. She can tell you about how we were standing together against terrorists and against the rights of minorities and how much of that was exploited. Today, no single one can take the camera and go on the street and report anything.
I have made one point since CNN is mentioned. We remember Omar Suleiman, Allah yarhamu, how we can have that important interview in the last days of Mubarak without the support of Omar Suleiman, being head of intelligence, to Christina Manpour. And we had that important interview, meaning that sometimes real smart journalists needs to keep the dialogue open, keep the channels, and use it because it's not about you. It's not about Christina or Bashar or Ahmed or whoever. It's
Or
about,
Gillian.
or it is, yes, it is about the message and the testimony. So keep it open, let's have this story narrated to the whole world, and then our politicians should do their job.
So what about now? What about the solutions now in terms of the narrative? Because if we see that there is, not allowing basically media to be covering things in a way that even in Egypt were traditionally allowed in a way. And also we're seeing that there is that hate speech that is coming out that is repeated from the media and on social media as well, which is something that we saw. But then who could help control this narrative and basically turn it in the right direction? Because there has to be somebody that will take ownership and responsibility to correct and move the kind of things in the right direction.
Luckily, we all have social media now. And you hear me putting a call that every one of us, every single one of us should never give up. He should talk his mind, he should talk the truth, and give the right support to the right people in need. And we keep doing it. It's going to be a long fight, but we have to do it. We have to go. Media is counterpart only by media. Nothing else.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, we're going to get to the questions now, actually. But just let them finish their points and then.
So, as I said, it's a responsibility of everyone. And we also, we have to give voices to the secular and the people whose broad mind more than this. We have a responsibility, since most of us is not living in Egypt now, because we have a freedom to talk more. So why don't we? We should keep doing it, and we should keep trying it.
Also, and if nobody else wants to answer
I
to
wanna
this
add
point,
something.
because we're going to be okay.
Yeah, I want to build on this concept. It's very,
Yes.
very important.
Yes.
As we mentioned the embedded journalism, there is citizen journalism. And now the citizen is a journalist. Being a good citizen, which is a very nice term, I learned especially in America, you have to be a good citizen, meaning give back. Not only in Starbucks you buy or a Chick-fil-A, you have to give back. So there are lots of people from that part of the world who work in different areas. Like we people from media should be doing something about that. And the decision maker of the media industry should be more smart to say, you need to tackle this problem, you need to be a little bit relaxed and have really good argumentative discussion to take place so people will not shy away or block you out. Because, for example, if this kind of conference, definitely Egyptian TV will not cover it. And I assure you, I'm not prophesizing anything here, not a single station in the Middle East will do that. Even I'm in doubt if Coptic channels will broadcast that or not. I will be sad if it's not broadcast. At least clips. Now Majdi confirms that I will do good in prophecies. so that our last hope could be CNN or someone from the attendees or the participants who will send some clips and open the discussion. You know, it's truth needs light. It needs to be under the sun. Bring it to the table and let people, if you are really confident that you have the logic, this is our sword. And this is a biblical expression.
Yes, and
The sword of truth is the word.
yeah.
And we have the word, the sound, and the image. We have three of them.
And don't underestimate your power.
Of course. Yeah.
There was a photographer called Eddie Adams. He stopped by doing one picture. He stopped the war in Vietnam. Eddie Adams took the picture. We all have it in our mind of Southern policeman shooting a communist guy in the street. And this picture stopped the war. We all have in our mind the picture of the Syrian boy, little child, drowned
Oh.
in the Turkish Ocean. And this picture made Germany accept all the Syrian refugees. Don't underestimate, because the real fundamentalism and the real dictatorship go against our culture. They want us to live in the past. They want us to keep the system of slavery and depression. And culture is the only thing people choose in their life. We choose to dress like how my, and this is our right to keep the choice for our culture. So don't underestimate yourself. One word and one picture in a good cause and in a good time can really change the world.
Now we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to skip my last question and go straight to our audience. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I came a bit late, but I think also it was really great what you mentioned about having secular journalists. So I wanted to know what, is there any training, like with Committee to Protect Journalists, is there training for journalists on freedom of religion and belief? Because both organizations I'm here representing work on repealing anti-apostasy and anti-blasphemy laws. And I know there's actually a famous Coptic, well, he was Mohamed Gohar, he became
Yes.
Shoy, and he reported on the violence and then he was arrested. Also, if someone has an update on what's happened to him, that would be interesting. But there is also bias amongst journalists in general. Is there work already in the journalistic group to have that acceptance so that you can change belief, that you can believe what you want? Because that's also a blind spot often in reporting, is that they don't see that as an issue, so they won't report on it. And there's a lot of issues that come out of it, like what we hear about with the coerced conversions, kidnapping of women and girls, and then you also have in the family law issues because of the Islamic family law. So all these issues don't get reported on because people don't think it's an issue. So is there training in freedom of religion and belief among journalists so that they can report on issues that maybe many Copts face in the country?
That's for you.
I'll just say that part of our job is determining case by case if the person is a journalist or are they in trouble because of their work as journalists. And that is case by case because every situation is different, every country is different. And that's where we put in, for example, what are the questions, the issues that are considered taboo in a society. And one of them is apostasy. We have documented in Egypt and across the region cases in which journalists have been imprisoned. But our first case in the committee in database from Egypt goes to 1992 when Dr. Farag Fouda, Allah yarhamu, was killed because he was an apostate. And I think this was the first case we had in Egypt, but we have other cases from around the world that shows that specifically writing about religious freedom, defending religious minorities are considered taboos and off limit in many societies. I'm not going to say that there is a training about how to be sensitive on those issues. I think more than anything, we do consider journalism is asking difficult questions, and this is one of them.
Over here.
Yeah, Mr. Mohamed Gohar talked about one picture can make a big difference and change people's mind. Is this really true in Islamic world where the conscience is spoiled right now? We have seen dances in the street and joy over September 11 and every massacre everywhere. Do you think that will happen if something like this, just a picture will change it, or we need a lot of changes in the construct of the mind of how to accept the others and everything else, and have human mind before we expect that the picture will change anymore?
The picture is a trigger and not the weapon. The weapon is really education, science, freedom of expression, all these things. But the picture is the trigger, as I said. It's the final القشة التي تقسم زار البعير. In Arabic, I can translate this.
The straw that broke the camel's back.
Yes. Thank you.
May I add on the previous question, because I believe it's a very valid point. The problem that journalism sometimes mixed with activism, and sometimes, and this is a very dangerous path. And the other problem with journalism, especially in the Middle East, that it's always associated with strings with authority. So someone who has the power, has the money, will be like controlling the narrative, and the religious matter as being one of the basic components of civic rights, which is constitutional in all the constitutions of the Middle East, thanks to the issue that was raised earlier today, that all begins with Article number 2. Because if you are dealing with me differently from my brother here, based on religion, then if you mess with my God, that's okay with him because his religious freedoms to express his, bullying to my faith. And this is a huge issue that not only journalism, I believe there's a lack of involvement in it, because many journalists, and I'll say that as self-criticism, have our own prejudices. So we be more soft and leaner on whatever is the discussion when it comes to Judaism, for example, and more like solid if it has to do with Christianity, because we have citizens who are Christians. But when it comes to Islam, illa Rasulullah, then you'll have all that bald heads will explode. And you ask yourself, why is that? When you have a post by Mahdi on yesterday's discussion, and I see really very, very derogatory content from social media posted as a comment on his page. Where's Big Apple? Where's the big guys in the big media, big tech? Why they are not censored? So we are failing, all of us, journalists and big media and big tech. We are all really failing in that.
If there's no other questions from our audience, yes, go ahead.
I have an observation. We actually don't know what Egyptians think, right? There's no polling. You see video of people dancing in the street, you see tweets, but that could be a minority. I mean, Gohar risked his life, lost his media empire, lost his home because he took care to save 15 Copts.
Yeah.
How many other Egyptians, Muslims, would have done that? How many would have wanted to do it but aren't brave enough?
Yeah.
It could be that the vast majority of Egyptians, Muslims, do find it appalling that a Jew was murdered, that Copts were slaughtered, that their neighbors are being persecuted, but they're too frightened to speak up. So when we talk about, Egypt, we actually don't know what the people actually feel because they're oppressed and they can't tell us. And if you put a microphone in front of their face, they will tell you the party line of what their government has told them to say because they're afraid. So it may be that seeing representations of people who are brave, who speak out, who are reasonable, will give them courage and give them validation that they aren't crazy, that this is wrong. So thought.
Thank you very much. And I do think that, us being also here in the United States, it is important that we also talk about it and remind our people who are watching us even today the importance of, raising our voices and that hate speech is never okay, it's never acceptable. Incitement of terrorism is horrible, and being anti-anybody from any religious or ethnic group is not okay. You have to, exactly what you were saying about thinking about others the way you think about yourself, and being anti-Semitic and allowing the media to promote this type of ideology is just very dangerous all around, and it will haunt everybody. So I want to thank you so much all for this really important conversation, and all of the audience for those great questions, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.